Welcome to the first installment of Talha's book reviews. Today I am accompanied by my good friend Aman Bhatti.
Thank you for having me, Talha. It's a pleasure to be here.
The pleasure is all mine, Aman. So today we're talking about No Fixed Address, Who Really Cares, by Canadian author Susin Nielsen. So to start our podcast, Aman, I'd like to ask you your overall opinion on the book, maybe out of 5 stars.
If I had to give it a rating, I'd probably say 4 to 4.5 stars.
Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so for me, it's one of the best books I've read in quite a while, honestly. It was really interesting. I really liked how the characters were, played off each other and their chemistry. I liked the supporting cast, the main character. But the main thing I found that was wrong about it was the last arc, the Who, What, Where, When arc. In my opinion, it was rushed. You didn't get to feel the characters' emotions, especially Felix. I would have loved to hear more about Felix and what he was thinking in those moments where he could have won $25,000, which would have been amazing for his family.
Yeah, I agree with you. Probably a 4 to 4.5 stars. But something I feel like Susan Nielsen could have done a bit better was the character development for more side characters, but still important to the plot.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so we're going to continue talking about character development. About Felix Knudsen, the main character of No Fixed Address.
See, I understand where you're coming from the development of the side characters, but you have to admit, Felix had some pretty good development.
Yes, I can agree.
I feel Felix really improved throughout the entire story. If not improved, he definitely changed. He became more caring. He kind of connected with other people. At the beginning of the book, you kind of it seemed like he wasn't the best kid. Like he didn't make a lot of friends except for Dylan when he was a lot younger after his grandma obviously passed away. It was really only him and his mom, and then he found friends. And just like the entire thing of how he's still human, so he does make mistakes, like how he yelled at his mom.
A relatable protagonist.
Yeah, he was definitely a relatable protagonist. But besides that, he was just amazing. I really liked him.
So you talk about their friends a lot. So two of Felix's best friends is Dylan and Winnie. Would you like to talk about how they contributed towards his character development?
Yeah, I feel like a lot of good stories have those two archetypes, like the best friend and the girlfriend, or the potential girlfriend in a lot of other stories.
Yeah.
Or boyfriend if the main protagonist is a girl. It's an interesting dynamic. I really like how they play off each other, and the chemistry is a lot better than a lot of other trios I've seen in different books.
Yeah, I can agree.
Yeah, so it was just I really liked the chemistry. I really liked how they played off each other. But as you said earlier, the development for Dylan and Winnie, specifically Dylan, I felt was lackluster.
Yeah, I can agree. For someone, as you talked about earlier, Dylan and Felix have been friends since a young age. And I feel like getting more of a backstory on their friendship could have helped me see the plot in a more visible way, if you will.
Yeah.
So someone else that contributed a lot to Felix's character development was Astrid, his mom. So can you just give a quick few words about her as a character?
Well, I don't know if it's going to be a few words. It might be a tad bit longer than that. I really loved Astrid, to be completely honest. I felt she was a wonderful character, wonderfully written. She definitely made her mark on the story. Obviously, she influenced Felix. As you see, his choice in girls is very similar to his mother and Winnie. Winnie was a very similar person to Astrid, and I really liked that dynamic. How Astrid said about how she doesn't like having Felix call her mom. I like that she was different, but that's solely as a character, in my opinion.
Yeah. So Astrid and Felix's dynamic as a mother and son is a bit unusual. Can you just talk about how Astrid, as a mom, how you view her?
Yeah, for me, Astrid wasn't the best mom, clearly, as she done a ton of immoral actions throughout the story. Stealing, breaking into house. It felt really that she wasn't a good mother. She seemed more like a big sister or a friend versus a mother, obviously. She wasn't really the stereotypical mother.
Yeah, I can agree with you there. But you talked about how she was stealing and breaking into houses. This goes into something I'd also like to talk about: world problems. In this book, No Fixed Address, we see homelessness, domestic abuse, poverty, theft. So I'd like to get your opinion on how you think Susan Nielsen did, kind of portraying that in this book.
Okay, so I'm gonna start with homelessness. For homeless people, besides Felix and Astrid, obviously the main characters, I'd like to touch on Bob the Bard. I feel like he was an underrated character. He really showed a light on how real homelessness is. He was just a random dude who had a university degree, worked, had a family, children, a wife, and then one thing led to another, and he's out on the street begging for money. It was just really sad and heartbreaking. And for Felix and Astrid as well, how they try to stay away from telling the government, and they don't want to go to homeless shelters or anything like that because they don't. Some of it is definitely linked to Astrid's pride, but I feel like that's not all. She was also scared that she'll be taken away from her son, which she loved so dearly. And it's just really emotional. And I love that aspect of how she portrayed homelessness in Vancouver and Canada and the world in general.
All right. So another thing that you talked about a bit earlier is how Astrid would steal. So Felix would actually keep a tab on what Astrid would be stealing from different stores, whether it be No Frills or Armada Grocery. So I'd like just to get a quick perspective on what you think. Do you think theft for the poor to steal is okay?
I don't.
You
To be
don't?
completely honest, I just don't. Stealing in any form is obviously illegal, first and foremost. And second, it's taking away something other people could have, or you're not actually earning it. Then again, I understand where she was coming from with No Frills and how they make a ton of money anyways. What's one bag of almonds, I think, was something she stole.
Sausages.
What's some sausages to them? It should be nothing, but especially for Ahmadi's groceries, I felt that was terrible of her. That was just an immoral thing. She can't continue to say the same excuse with Ahmadi's grocery. They're just a local grocery shop. That's where their entire income is, and they're still like just trying to hang on and make ends meet, and she is stealing from them. As they said earlier, I'm pretty sure even one banana could mean the world to them. Theft for them was terrible. And how many things she stole as well. Like, most people, when they're stealing, I've never experienced it firsthand, obviously, but I feel people probably think it's just one time, I'll never do it again, I just need it for this one moment. But like everything, every bad thing in the world, every time you do it, it becomes easier and easier and easier to do it. I feel like that's for everything in life. The more times you do something, the easier it becomes to do it again. And it's just an endless cycle. And I really liked how Felix kept a tab. It was like, I think somewhere close to 15, maybe 20 things that were on his list. And that was really nice of Felix. I felt Felix was a really moral person and didn't want to steal, even though he ended up stealing a bit later on.
Yeah, so like you just said, so not only can stealing just affect yourself, and like you might be addicted to stealing, or you'll think I'll only do it once, but it'll also influence other. Like Felix thought he'd never steal from a grocery store like Ahmadi's grocery, but then he sees himself so hungry, nowhere to go home, and he ends up stealing himself. So not only does he have does Astrid stealing affect herself, but it also affects.
Sorry about that.
It's okay. Affects her son.
Yeah.
Okay, so earlier we talked about lack of character development. And we talked about Dylan. Do you think there's something else that Susan Nielsen could have done, or do you think she did a good job other than Dylan, maybe Winnie in character development?
Yeah, there were a couple other characters. I feel like the teacher was one. I felt he was pretty mysterious. He felt like a really moral dude. I really liked him, but it's kind of mysterious. And also, before we move on, I'd also like to touch upon Amadi. Like Amadi's groceries, Mrs. and Mr. Amadi. Felt they were wonderful characters.
Yeah.
Wonderfully written, wonderfully portrayed as people. If they were real people, obviously it's just fictional, but if they were real people, they were wonderful. How they were willing to give Astrid and Felix some space. When Felix was hungry, they were willing to spare some muffins.
Mm-hmm.
It was really heartwarming to see.
Yeah, Syrian immigrants, it shows
Yeah.
that these are real people that you are stealing from, or...
Yeah. So, what was the previous thing you asked before that?
So, any character development you think that you would have liked to see more backstory on any character, or do you think overall Susan Nielsen did a good job?
Yeah, as I said about Mr. Thibault, I think it was their teacher, and also
he became pretty major later on when when he came to him.
Yeah.
So seeing more more of a plot around him would have helped.
Yeah, as well as the bully in their class.
Dylan or Donald.
Yeah. He was kind of just brushed aside. I feel like for stories or for anything like that, for entertainment, it should, if you introduce a character, you should definitely touch upon them more, unless they are really like they're never gonna be used again. But Donald did reoccur multiple times throughout the story, like how he talked about the shirt from that Felix was using.
Yeah,
Salvation Armies, yeah. So that was like, he did reoccur, or how he bullied Winnie with her hat. That was like, it was a reoccurring theme, but he was never really touched upon behind his facade of bullying.
So yeah, I think everyone who read the book would love to have seen more character development from those characters. While we're on the theme of world problems, another thing that I had saw in the book was domestic abuse. Can you just really quickly give us your words on that?
Yeah, domestic abuse. Now, for those of you who don't know, domestic means like in your house or like other stuff like that. So like how Abelard hit Astrid, as it was mentioned, when they were living together. That'd be domestic abuse. And that, honestly, I feel like was glossed over. That's a huge issue in the world. Abuse in general, not even just domestic. It's just a really big problem, and I would have loved to see more about how Felix thought about that, how Astrid thought about that, how the world thought about that. Maybe, touch upon that more, maybe give more examples, like mention it more.
Yeah, so one example is actually when Abelard threatened to sue Astrid for assault when she scratched him. Felix brought a point that he had video evidence of Abelard hitting his mom with both a social worker and a police officer there, and they didn't do much about it. They really just looked over it. I feel like that is unrealistic and is a huge plot hole. So I think either Susan Nielsen should have just left that whole part out in its entirety, or just maybe had built on more about that.
Yeah, I feel like that was like, it was looked over. It wasn't really addressed. Or as you said, a police officer and a social worker were there. The fact that they ignored that, unless they actually knew that Felix was bluffing, which could be a whole issue in and of itself, Abelard should have been suspicious if they didn't talk about that.
Yeah, but either way, it's really just a plot hole, or just kind of a mistake, because I hadn't personally seen, maybe they caught his bluff. I hadn't seen that as a reader. I read it over multiple times. I didn't really see how that was implied.
Yeah. The only way I would have thought so, like, I obviously don't think so either. I think that was a plot hole. I completely agree with you. The only thing I would have thought is that, when Felix was talking about his backstory to with Constable Lee, he mentioned about like their history, and I feel like that was the only point where they might have noticed. But besides that, yeah, like I understand everything you've said. I definitely agree. It was a plot hole. What shouldn't have been in there, either take it out or actually explain it further because they didn't really build on it.
All right, well, Amman, it's been a pleasure having you on our show.
Thank you for having me here. It's been a pleasure, of course, to be here and talk with you about a wonderful, wonderful book which I read.
All right, yeah, so thank you all for tuning in, and goodbye.